uranidase and other things like endotoxins and enterotoxins again, because they're all virulence factors. But we already know one, hemolysis. The enzymes that help Staph aureus break down blood are hemolysis. And streptococcus, remember? Streptococcus are beta hemolytic. Group B streptococcus, Group A streptococcus are beta hemolytic. Group A and Group B streptococcus are beta hemolytic, which means the worst kind. Staphylococcus aureus is also hemolytic. So streptococcus isn't the only bacteria that's hemolytic. Staph aureus is also. That's why it's more pathogenic than some of the others. All right, you already know what a nosocomial disease came from. Right. What do you call it when the kid sneezes and I inhale his infectious what? Droplets. It's also called an aerosol. And it's also airborne. So sometimes they'll have questions just about terminology. Droplet infection is an airborne infection. It's also called an aerosol infection because you're inhaling infectious droplets. What if you catch a disease because you rubbed up against my big old pussy MRSA oil? That's direct contact, right? Direct contact. What if it's from having intercourse without a condom and the AIDS virus was carried in your semen? Well, yes, but it's bodily fluid transmission. What if it's contaminated food or water? Waterborne or it's foodborne? That is also vector-borne, right? So we'll get some epidemiological type questions like that. How was cholera transmitted? How did people get it? The water was contaminated. I think they mentioned in the movie, or somewhere I read it, what happened was they had a pump on Broad Street, and people would get their water from the pump on Broad Street, but some dizzy broad, not knowing that germs caused disease in those days, rinsed her baby's diaper in the well water. And it contaminated the whole pump and everything. Cholera is transmitted by water. It's waterborne. Remember that H1N1 swine flu thing that happened in 2009? Anybody remember that?
H1F1?
H1N1? Remember that H1N1 flu that was going around? Okay. What if it goes out of control and everybody in New Jersey gets it?
Epidemic.
It's an epidemic. What if it gets out of control and those people from New Jersey, well, hello, Ebola. They were afraid Ebola was going to become a pandemic because people were like leaving Zaire and going to all these different countries. So pandemic means it spreads around the world. HIV is the classic pandemic. Epidemic is an outbreak in a local population. Some epidemics can be big. You might consider it an epidemic if it was throughout the United States, but once it leaves the United States, goes to other countries, they can call it a pandemic. Endemic means a disease that's at a low level in a population. It's there, some people get it, but we got it under control. A sporadic outbreak is when all of a sudden, like what happened, all of a sudden everybody that goes to Disney World gets measles. That would be a sporadic epidemic. Kind of had a sporadic outbreak. Ebola is kind of like that. They've had Ebola outbreaks in the past. It's just this one was really bad in terms of numbers of people that got it. What's epizootic mean? What's an epizootic disease?
Between animals.
It's an epidemic of some zoonotic disease, a disease that's either among animals, or you might even use it if it was a zoonotic disease that was transmitted to humans, but epizootic is an epidemic for animals, yeah. That's a bummer. Is anybody watching that zoo program on TV? I don't know why I'm watching it, it's so stupid, but actually, you know why I'm watching it? Because I want the animals to win. The animals all go crazy and they start killing humans. And I'm like, yeah, go animals.
What kind of would be like endemic, the common cold?
Yeah, good. And actually they consider measles endemic in our population too, because a few people will get it, but we got it under control because most people are vaccinated. That's called herd immunity. But then when you have an outbreak, because not enough people got vaccinated, then it kind of became like an epidemic or a sporadic outbreak of the disease. Let's see. Don't forget your bacteria. You'll get some little bacterial questions. What are fibria used for? Hanging on, right. And what's capsule used for? Protection and sticking, right. And what's a fomite? Right, it's an inanimate object, the surface usually, but technically a fomite could be something like a tool maybe. If somebody had a tool that was covered with germs and everybody in the class was using the same tool. There's those pencils people leave behind, they're all chewed up and everything. You're like, oh God, I'm not touching that pencil. All right, and so what if we sanitize our bathrooms? That can prevent us from spreading disease if we keep the bathroom clean, right? And let's see. Oh yeah, this one you need to know. Stages of illness. This is actually in chapter 14. We haven't got to this stuff yet, but we will. But stages of illness, you just gotta write it down and have it handy or memorize it. Let me get a better pen. Stages of illness, you can write them down. And stages of illness are incubation. There's an incubation period. The organism gets into your body, but it needs time to go through the lag phase, sort of acclimate, right? Then once it's acclimated, it will start growing. So it's got to colonize you and acclimate. Then it's going to grow exponentially. So incubation happens while that thing is getting established inside of you. That's the incubation period. Viruses. Virus has to get inside the first host cells, replicate, burst out, and get to more host cells. So until you get a certain viral load, heard that term before, viral load? So it's incubation period. The virus is booting up. It's getting higher in numbers until you get to a certain viral load. Then you're in the prodromal period. So you have incubation period. You're incubating a pathogen. Then you have a prodromal period. Prodromal or prodrome, it might be. Prodrome. Prodrome, whatever. I think that's prodromal. So your prodromal period is early signs and symptoms before the actual disease symptoms come on. Once you got the actual full-blown symptoms, that's considered the illness stage. You're ill. Your immune system, working on it, finally getting the job done, you go into a decline. Your pathogen numbers are declining. They're dying off, your immune system's killing them off. But guess what? You are weakened by the whole event. You get sick, that organism has been hurting you. Even after you get rid of the organism and the organism's dead or declining, you now have to rebuild your tissues that it destroyed. So you're in a convalescence period. They used to call it a convalescent home. Right? And it's like, who are you kidding?
Yeah.
They aren't getting any better. They're going to die. So I don't think they call it a convalescent home anymore. People finally learn the vocabulary. Okay, so those are your stages of illness. Or it's the sequence of a disease process. So I call it stages of illness, but you might see disease process. That's the disease process. All right, what's a pathogen?
Harmful virus.
Something that causes disease. Patho is disease, gen is generating. So any microbe that generates disease or causes disease is a pathogen. You know the difference between transient flora and normal flora or commensal flora? Transients come and go. Your normal flora stays with you pretty much for your lifetime. And how do we classify disease? Remember with viruses, we classified viruses based on their type of genetic material. When we looked at bacteria, we classified the bacteria based on the shape and arrangement of their cells, whether they had endospores or flagella, whether they had a thick wall or a thin wall, right? And when we classified parasites, we looked at, you know, what kind of an organism was it? Was it fungi, or was it a worm, an animal, or was it a protozoan? But when we classify disease, we're looking at the type of microbe that causes the disease. That's why I bothered to go through parasitic diseases like worms and fungi and protista, and bacterial diseases and viral diseases, because I was trying to give you the taxonomic approach to disease. And that's looking at the type of microbe that causes disease. So when you talk about taxonomic classification, you're talking about what type of organism is it? What type of organism causes the disease? So I'm looking at it from the organism's perspective, not the patient's perspective. Alrighty. If you get a list of STDs, could you figure out which ones are caused by a virus and which ones are caused by bacteria? Like, for example, chlamydia. What kind of organism is that?
Bacteria.
Syphilis. What kind of organism is that?
Bacteria.
Bacteria. Gonorrhea. Bacteria. The trick. Protista. Remember that your flagellated protista? How about herpes? How about
Virus.
HIV?
Virus.
Those are viral. How about AIDS? HIV?
Virus.
That's a virus, right. Good. Hepatitis also. That's a virus.